Dear students, we know that nature is for all living beings. Man should learn to live in harmony with nature. That means man should try to be a part of nature. But what is man doing? We have just seen in a video what is man's attitude towards nature. Being one with nature is always mesmerizing, is always interesting. So being a part of nature is very interesting. And our first lesson, Adventures in a Banyan Tree, tells us about a boy who lived in close relationship with nature and what nature had in store for him. Okay, now let's move on to our lesson, Adventures in a Banyan Tree. Though the house and grounds of our home in India were grandfather's domain, the magnificent old banyan tree was mine, chiefly because grandfather at the age of 65 could no longer climb it. Grandmother used to tease him about this and would speak of a certain Countess of Desmond, an English woman who lived to the age of 117 and would have lived longer if she hadn't fallen while climbing an apple tree. The spreading branches of the banyan tree, which curved to the ground and took root again, forming a maze of arches, gave me endless pleasure. The tree was older than the house, older than grandfather, as old as the town of Dehra, nestling in a valley at the foot of the Himalayas. My first friend and familiar was a small grey squirrel. Arching his back and sniffing into the air, he seemed at first to resent my invasion of his privacy. But when he found that I did not arm myself with a catapult or air gun, he became friendlier. And when I started leaving him pieces of cake and biscuit, he grew bolder and finally became familiar enough to take food from my hands. Before long, he was delving into my pockets and helping himself to whatever he could find. He was a very young squirrel, and his friends and relatives probably thought him headstrong and foolish for trusting a human. In the spring, when the banyan tree was full of small red figs, birds of all kinds would flock into its branches. The red-bottomed bulbul, cheerful and greedy, gossiping rosy pastures, parrots and crows squabbling with each other all the time. During the fig season, the banyan tree was the noisiest place on the road. Okay, dear students, let's see what does that mean. Though the house and grounds of our home In India, where grandfather's domain, the magnificent old banyan tree was mine, chiefly because grandfather at the age of 65 could no longer climb it. Though the house and grounds means the land, of our home in India, where grandfather's domain is an area of territory owned or controlled by a particular person. So, the house and grounds of our home in India were grandfather's property. The narrator says our home in India. Actually, the narrator, Ruskin Bond, is British. His father was working in India during the British time, and when India got independence and the Britishers moved back to England, the family of Ruskin Bond stayed back in India. The magnificent old banyan tree was mine. Magnificent, beautiful. Banyan tree. This is the banyan tree. Was mine, was the narrator's. So here the narrator is telling that the house and land belonged to grandfather, but the banyan tree was the narrator's. Chiefly means mainly because grandfather at the age of 65 could no longer climb it, because grandfather was 65 years old and he could not climb on the banyan tree. Grandmother used to make fun of. So grandmother used to make fun of him about this and would speak of a certain Countess of Desmond. So she would say about a countess. Countess is the wife of a count, and count is a position given to a person in England. So she was the wife of a Count of Desmond. Desmond is a place in England. An English woman who lived to the age of 117, and this countess, this lady, lived to the age of 117. She had a very long life and would have lived longer if she hadn't fallen while climbing an apple tree. And she would have lived longer and if she had not fallen while climbing an apple tree. So she died when she fell down climbing an apple tree. So she was telling the grandfather not to climb on the banyan tree. The spreading branches of the banyan tree, which curved to the ground and took root again, forming a maze of arches, gave me endless pleasure. So the branches of the banyan tree were spreading out. This is how the branches of a banyan tree spreads out. So which curved to the ground again. So these branches came to the ground, took root again and went up in the sky, forming a maze of arches. This is what is a maze. You are familiar with it. Getting in is quite easy, but getting out is little difficult. So forming a maze of arches gave me endless pleasure, happiness. So the narrator was very happy playing among the branches of the banyan tree. The tree was older than the house. The tree was older than the house, older than grandfather. So it was a very old tree, as old as the town of Dehra. So this tree was old as the town of Dehra. Dehra is Dehradun, which is the present capital of Uttaranchal, nestling in a valley, situated in a half-hidden or sheltered position. So this place was half-hidden or sheltered in a sheltered position in a valley. Valley is a place between the mountains at the foot of the Himalayas. So Dehradun is in the Himalayas. The tree was older than the house, older than grandfather, as old as the town of Dehradun, and it was lying hidden in a valley at the foot of the Himalayas. My first friend and familiar was a small grey squirrel. So the narrator's first friend was a squirrel. This is a squirrel. So my first friend on the banyan tree was a squirrel. Arching his back. Arching means having the curve shape. Arching his back and sniffing. Action of drawing the air audibly through the nose into the air. He seemed at first to resent, angry. He seemed at first to be angry at my invasion, at my attack of his privacy. The squirrel did not like the narrator on the banyan tree, and in the beginning he was very angry with the narrator because he was attacking his privacy. But when he found that I did not arm myself with a catapult, the squirrel found that the boy, that is the narrator, I did not arm myself with a catapult. This is a catapult. You know what is it used for? It is used for hunting animals and birds, or air gun. Catapult and air gun, both are used for hunting animals and birds. So when the squirrel found that I did not have catapult or air gun, he became friendlier. He became one of my friends. And when I started leaving him pieces of cake and biscuits, and when I went to the banyan tree, I would take cake and biscuit with me to give to the squirrel. He grew bolder, he grew brave, he grew courageous, and finally became familiar enough to take food from my hands. And he became familiar to take food from my hands. He started taking food from my hands. So his friendship was now becoming stronger and stronger. Before long, he was delving into my pockets, searching. So when I went to the banyan tree, he would search into my pockets and helping himself to whatever he could find. And he will take whatever he could find from my pocket. He was a very young squirrel. So this squirrel was a young squirrel, and his friends and relatives, that is the other squirrels, probably thought him headstrong, very determined to do what one wants without listening to others, which means doing things just as one likes, and foolish for trusting a human. So the other squirrels considered him headstrong and foolish for trusting a human, because as far as animals are concerned, trusting human beings is a foolish thing. In the spring, when the banyan tree was full of small red figs, this is the red figs of the banyan tree, which is its fruit. So in the spring season, when the banyan tree is covered with red figs, birds of all kinds would flock into its branches. Flock. A number of birds of one kind feeding, resting, or traveling together. So birds of all kinds would come and sit on the branches of the banyan tree. The red-bottomed bulbul. This is the red-bottomed bulbul. Cheerful and greedy, cheerful, happy. So the red-bottomed bulbul is happy and greedy also. Greedy to eat the red figs. Gossiping rosy pastures. This is the rosy pasture. Gossiping rosy pasture. And parrots and crows. And also parrots and crows. All these birds would come on the branches of the banyan tree, squabbling. Squabbling means quarreling noisily over a silly matter. Squabbling with each other all the time. So they will be quarreling with each other. That is the birds, the bulbul, the rosy pasture, the parrots, the crows. They will be quarreling with each other all the time. Here you find a word called gossiping. Gossiping means the unnecessary talks which is usually associated with women. During the fig season, the banyan tree was the noisiest place on the road. During the fig season, the banyan tree was the noisiest place on the road. It's just like your classroom when there is no teacher. When there is no teacher in your class, your classroom is the noisiest classroom in the school. Okay, dear students, now let's look at some questions which will help you to understand the lesson. House and grounds were of grandfather's domain, but the magnificent old banyan tree was mine. Why did the boy say so? Yes, what are your answers? Yes. Grandfather could no longer climb it. Because the grandfather could no longer climb on the banyan tree, the boy said that the banyan tree was mine. Next question. How did the squirrel become a friend of the boy? Yes. What are your answers? Okay. When the squirrel noticed that the narrator did not arm himself with a catapult or air gun, he became friendlier. Let's look into the next question. What did the friends of the squirrel think about his friendship with a human? What might have made them think so? Yes. What you got your answers? Okay, let's check it. His friends and relatives probably thought him headstrong and foolish for trusting a human. What might have made them think so? The second part of the question. Human beings usually harm animals, so they thought him to be headstrong and foolish. To the next question. How was the banyan tree the noisiest place during the fig season? When the banyan tree was full of small red figs, birds of all kinds would flock into its branches. Red-bottomed bulbul, cheerful and greedy, gossiping rosy pastures, and parrots and crows squabbling with each other all the time. So, how did it become the noisiest place? When it was full of small red figs. Birds of all kinds would flock into its branches. But what all kind of birds? Red-bottomed bulbul, which are cheerful and greedy, gossiping rosy pastures, parrots and crows. They would be squabbling with each other, making the banyan tree the noisiest place during the fig season. Okay, that was the end of the questions. Okay, dear students, let's look at some additional questions. How did the grandmother tease grandfather? Yes, your answers. Speaking of a certain Countess of Desmond who lived to the age of 117 and died by falling when climbing an apple tree. We have one more question. Who was the first friend of the narrator on the banyan tree? Who was the first friend? The squirrel. The squirrel was the first friend of the narrator on the banyan tree. You have some assignments. The boy, after making the friendship with the squirrel, writes his feelings in a diary. Prepare a diary entry. So the boy, he makes friendship with the squirrel and he writes his feelings in a diary. So you have to prepare the diary entry of the boy. Next question. The boy feels that the banyan tree is his. He writes a letter to his friend telling him why he feels so. Write the likely letter. So the narrator tells that the banyan tree belonged to him. So the boy feels that the banyan tree is his. He writes a letter to his friend telling why he feels that the banyan tree belonged to him. So imagining yourself as the boy, you have to write the letter. And the last one, the boy, after making friends with the squirrel, makes a conversation with his grandfather about it. So the boy is making friends with the squirrel. He had made friendship with the squirrel. And he is very happy. So he makes a conversation with his grandfather about his friendship with the squirrel. So you have to make a conversation. And remember, the conversation should have at least 6 exchanges. Okay, students, that's all for today. Thank you and have a nice day. And you have to do these assignments and you would have to take a photo of it and send it to me on my WhatsApp number.